and it looks like the default streaming settings, that those aren't enabled, but it's okay. I'm gonna stream using OBS.
Okay.
Something that my kids taught me about streaming video games. Well, great. So. Okay, we should be streaming now on YouTube. I'm just going to go double check that.
Okay. And I am going to leave you in charge of waiting rooms and all that.
Okay, yep, we're streaming.
Perfect. All right. We have quorum. I see one. I see Mike, John, Heather. That's at least 4. Okay. So we'll call the Reading Board of Education meeting to order at 7:31 p.m. I invite John to call the Easton board together if you have a quorum.
Just looking. Sorry, give me a moment. Okay, I see Gretchen. I see Katie. And I see Jeff. Call to order the Easton Board of Education.
Okay. And the first item of business is public comment. And what we can do is, if you're a member of the public interested in commenting, please raise your hand in the Zoom room. And while you're doing that, I received 3 pieces of public comment by email that I was asked to read. So I will read those while we're working out the room. The first is...
Sorry, Chris, just so everybody knows how, if you want to raise your hand, just hit the participants window and click the raise hand in order to indicate that you'd like to make public comment. All right.
Thank you, John. The first comment is from Amy Cabot of Reading, who says, I feel very strongly that our school system needs a comprehensive year-long course on African-American history and racism in America, preferably taught by an African-American teacher. It is high time this area of our kids' education is covered completely. Thank you. From Deb Schultz, Sullivan Drive, Reading, I fully endorse the development of a full-year course in diversity and inclusion in our school's curriculum. I'll go further by stating that the disconnect between our children's real-life experiences and what they are taught in class is reinforced by the lack of adequate lessons in racism and the institution of slavery. We can only learn from our history when we know our history. And the third is from Vanessa Allward, Cross Highway, Reading. I'd like to ask that we add more diversity in our education. Growing up in the United States and never learning about Black Wall Street and the massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma is shameful. We must do more to incorporate history of African Americans and Native Americans into more than just one short month. When my oldest was in kindergarten at RES, they used to join a school from Bridgeport at the Discovery Museum once or twice per month, but the program was soon cut. This allowed our kids to see, meet, and become friends with other children from different socioeconomic backgrounds, some diverse cultures, and not just more white middle-class kids. When race is just brushed aside without understanding the history of slavery, racial segregation, and the civil rights movement, it cannot be properly understood. So from there, for public comment of folks who are in the meeting, the first hand I see up is Tallulah Whaley.
Hi, I'm Tallulah Whaley, and I live on Windy Hill Road in Reading. And I'll try to make this as short as possible, but I have something to say, and I want to be as honest as possible. Okay. I attended RES, Reading Elementary School, from 2012 to 2014, and I attended John Reed Middle School from 2014 to 2018. In that time, every single teacher that I had was white. And coming from a New York City public school, what impression would you assume that that would have on a 7-year-old girl? Not a very good one. And I cannot even begin to imagine how out of place I would have felt if I were a student of color. These things, the lack of diversity in our staff, can be changed. Simply hire teachers of color. And trust me, I can already hear the old excuse that the employer will hire the best person for the job and won't even consider their skin color. But it's 2020, and as a former RES and John Reed Middle School student, the amount of casual racism that I heard every single day by my own classmates and peers was astonishing. And before I jump to judge my classmates for being racist, it must be remembered that they were taught this behavior. Racism is not something that a child is born with. Not only by their parents, not only are they taught this behavior by their parents and by the media, but by our very own school systems and teachers. The fact that I walk through those schools every single day for 6+ years, and not once did I ever see a teacher with a skin color different than mine, perfectly exemplifies the casual racism and white supremacy that exists in this town. Sheltered students see an entire staff composed of white men and women and think, this is what society looks like, therefore there is no one I can be racist towards. And then they feel free to say whatever and whichever derogatory words and phrases they please. And when they see a student of color in the same classroom as them, their inner defense mechanisms, which they were taught, kick in. They think, who is this outsider and what are they doing in my class? Now, not everything has to do with what the teacher themselves looks like. At an even larger scale, in fact, it has to do with what these students are being taught. I can confess that in my entire elementary school and middle school education in Reading, actual history was very rarely taught. Not once was I taught the hardships and struggles that minorities and people of color have to fight through just to reach basic equality. I taught that all to myself, and so did many of my classmates. We are all aware that Reading and even the entire American school system has only been teaching what the straight white man wants us to know. However, there is still time to change this. In light of recent civil rights violations and activism in our nation and around the world, there has been a steady stream of resources for teachers, schools, and superintendents to use in order to bring some real culture and history into their teaching. For example, Goodreads has a list of 294 teen and young adult books about the African American experience. No one is able to tell me that it is difficult to add one book to a summer reading list. I would hope that the leaders who have been elected to protect the education of Reading students will listen to what I have to say. And as a young person in this country, I can assure you that change is coming and everyone will have to adapt, whether it makes them uncomfortable or not. And every single one of you has a responsibility to uphold to themselves to decide which side of history they will be on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tallulah. The next comment I see is Sarah.
Okay, thank you. So Sarah Odell on Black Rock Turnpike. In Reading. Sorry. So I think that we have an opportunity to reconnect with our kids when we return to school in whatever way that we do, and really address like social and emotional health in a much needed way by truly committing to have an honest and thorough action for our school systems around race. Our kids don't benefit from not talking about it. They aren't taking on healthy attitudes from not talking about it. And in the past, when it's been brought up, I think that there's been a perception that it's a political issue. And I just wanted to say that somebody is right to live equally as an American and to go about getting educated in our public school systems and to live unbothered in their own skin is not a political issue. It's just basic decency and what we're supposed to be doing. So it's not a political issue to address the fact that white supremacy exists. It's not political to work towards taking it down as part of our education of children. We work to take down illiteracy and not knowing how to add too. Those aren't political things. That's part of an education process. And I think that the excuse that it's political often gives cover to not doing anything. So I want to really encourage you as you're looking forward to really think about this and see it as the human rights issue and the just basic decency job of education. I will say that I think a great place to start is with our curriculum. I have a student at RES, well, I'll soon have two. And in the years that we've been there, we have been constantly undoing inaccurate information that my kids are getting about the historical things that have happened in America, from like Thanksgiving stories that make me cringe and then we have to come home and have a talk about, to things like my kid this year was reading a book about slavery written from the perspective of a dog. I would like, and my son recently said that he learned that sometimes slavery was okay because families stayed together, and that sounds all right. And I said, and these conversations are not things that he's learning in our house. And we spend a lot of time on doing that. And I don't know if it's because we're not talking about it explicitly or because we're putting the wrong materials in front of the kids that they're drawing conclusions from that are problematic. The material that we choose in new curriculum has got to be from Black historians, Black writers, Indigenous authors, Latinx authors, not white people. I think that's part of the problem that we are running into. And I also think that the material can't just be like, we had slavery and then we had civil rights and now everything's chill. And I think we also need to make sure that the students are reading as assigned books just things about the experience of not being a white male. Like, I was an English lit student. I understand that the literary canon is what it is. But I think that we have an opportunity to change that in our students, and I think they're asking for it. So I think it's a real responsibility that we have. Tallulah made the great point about the hiring process, and that's another thing that we've noticed too, coming from a different area and moving to Reading. And I will say that I would love to see teachers be trained on how to have these conversations. It's not something that a lot of teaching programs address explicitly. So it's a great opportunity to use some professional development opportunities for that. And I would also recommend the teaching tolerance curriculum as a great place to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. The only other hand I still see up is Devin.
Yes.
Okay. Devin Weibel, 31 Woodland Drive. I'm in Easton. Sorry, you might also hear my 18-month-old. He's decided to join for the conversation. So I want to echo the comments of the prior two women. I think diversity and inclusion, when we think about our schools, our curriculum, our hiring practices, and our teacher training are paramount. The reality is we live in predominantly white communities, and it is of the essence that we teach our children to understand their privilege and to use that to overcome the racial divides that are happening in our country. We live in a reality that is that we have systemic racism, and if we do nothing and don't talk about it, our kids go into the world not recognizing that those things exist, and then do very little to change that. And we have an opportunity to empower our children to understand. I was a history teacher, the truth of history. I work in education now, and I work in curriculum work as well as in professional development. In my humble opinion, the first place to start is with teacher training, to help teachers understand their implicit biases and how that impacts how they teach content, the content that they choose, and how they lesson plan and how they impart knowledge to their students. We have a huge opportunity right now to take advantage. It's in the news. It's something that we should be talking to our kids about all of the time in age appropriate ways. And that the best way to do that is to start, our parents are doing it, to make sure that's happening in the schools. I know that our budgets are tight. I'm also on the Board of Finance in Easton, so I recognize how challenging the budget season was and how hard it will be going forward. But it's really important that we invest in our teachers and in our leadership in the PD for them, because it will be really the best way to encourage choices in texts that are read, the way we talk about those texts, the viewpoint and the perspective that we have as educators, and the way we ask questions and ask our kids to dig into those resources comes from our perspective and our understanding of our own biases and how they get in the way of understanding difference and different belief systems. So thank you for all the work that you do. I know it's really hard to be on boards, and so we appreciate all your time. That's it.
Thank you, Devin. I see Devin McBrayer.
Hi, I thought that raising your hand literally meant going like this. Sorry that I did that a little bit late. So my name's Devin McBrayer, and I'm a resident. I live on Bow Isles Lane right now. And I joined the Reading Easton Public School System in 5th grade at John Reed Middle School, and I went on to graduate from Joel Barlow in 2015. I just finished undergrad at Clark University in Worcester, Mass. this May. So it's been 5 years since I was a student of Joel Barlow High School, and I know that's not this particular school we're talking about right now, but it's been 9 years since I attended John Reed. But unless things have radically shifted, my experience and concerns, I think, remain relevant. So I'm, of course, speaking to you as a white woman who grew up in a nearly 95% white town. And with that fact comes the ability of many of us, myself included, to ignore the existence of racism altogether. Despite leaving the Reading school system with the feeling that I did indeed receive a good education, I remained woefully unaware of the complexities of racism on interpersonal and institutional levels. The same goes for many of my peers, in part evidenced by the pervasive use of racial slurs, along with claims about not being personally racist. I also speak as someone who only realized how much I had to unlearn and eventually relearn about race after I left Reading, Connecticut for the city of Worcester for college. I had never learned about white privilege. I had never been asked to examine my own whiteness and its inherent role in sustaining racist systems. I finally learned what a microaggression was at an assembly my first week of college and realized, wow, I grew up hearing this kind of stuff, saying this kind of stuff myself, and not realizing it was an issue. I recall in middle school completing a school project in which we chose a European explorer to research, and I chose Ferdinand Magellan, writing, and I wrote of his accomplishments without acknowledging or recognizing the need to acknowledge the ways in which his voyage affected the Chamorro people of Guam. And I remember a high school US history course in which we were finally made to read accounts of indigenous peoples, finally asked to recognize the breadth and depth of the violence in our country's founding. And even then, the information was presented as though it was a thing of the past, which we know, based on the continued mistreatment of indigenous people across the country, to not be true. I recall English classes in which we read numerous books about World War II and the Holocaust, Number the Stars, The Diary of Anne Frank, and later The Book Thief, and ensures the dehumanization and subordination of Black Americans in particular and people of color in general, for example. How is it that in 8th grade we read To Kill a Mockingbird and skipped over the N-word as if it was any other curse word? How is it that we did not read books by Black authors? All of this is to say that we need to do better, and we need to engage in an anti-racist curriculum, both in the classroom and outside, and starting, I believe, at a young age. So hopefully by the time people get to high school, they already have this foundation. So some places that you can begin. First, implement school-wide and or grade-specific assemblies which engage students in learning anti-racism. It is real everywhere, including in our schools and town. And these should be as much of a priority as assemblies that address bullying, active shooter drills, drug and alcohol use, sexual assault prevention, and so on, all of which I recognize differ depending on age. 2, teachers and administrators should also engage in anti-racism training. 3, and some other people spoke about this, redevelop a curriculum which incorporates Black and POC history, literature, and voices at all grade levels and throughout the year, rather than limiting such resources and discussions to race-specific blocks or segments, or to Black History Month, for example. Someone also brought this up, examine hiring practices. What steps does the school system take to attract a diverse pool of candidates for hire, and what support systems and opportunities for advancement are available to people of color who are employed in ER9? Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I encourage that any and all efforts to reimagine the diversity and inclusion curriculum should be led by people of color. And as white people, we need to utilize our positions of privilege while also being mindful of how much space we're taking up. So yeah, we need to step up, take responsible action, and not merely by adding a few books by Black authors to the English curriculum, but by being willing to reimagine and restructure the entire way in which we approach education in a generally very white, affluent town. So thank you for taking the time to listen to my concerns, and I'm happy to provide contact information if anyone wants to speak further.
Thank you, Devin. Layla Arisi.
Okay, hi. So
Can
my
you
name,
give your, I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry. My name's Layla Arisi. I sent out an email to most of the Board of Education, Easton and Reading, superintendent, and all the principals and vice principals of all the schools in Easton and Reading. And I just got notified about this meeting, And
Can you state your street and town, please?
Easton, Connecticut, North Park Avenue.
Thank you.
So in the email, I addressed Black Lives Matter movement and some actionable steps that can be taken within our school districts to promote race awareness and anti-racism. And I was happy to see that one of the topics of discussion for this meeting was diversity and inclusion in our curriculum, and thought it would be helpful for me to reiterate some of the steps I addressed in my email. But before I read the steps that I wrote in my email, I'd like to say that I'm a part of the Hispanic community. I'm also mixed, half Turkish, and going to school in Reading and Easton was very hard. I lived in fear of saying what my race was, and many teachers would ask me, "Oh, what are you?" which is very offensive, and I won't name them. So I definitely did not tell students what my race was, wouldn't speak Spanish or anything. And as someone who has 3 sisters in these schools currently, I am very scared for them and what they're experiencing. And they have told me all their experiences, and the N-word and racial slurs are definitely present. And they have went to principals and vice principals, and they have done nothing. In fact, they have said, "Oh, those students are just like that. Oh, that's just a problem student." And that's just not enough. So I'd like to continue with these steps and read them. So first, adding diversity, compassion, and anti-racism to the core curriculum of our districts as a course or otherwise. We have Madman as Hero as a course at Barlow. I took it. It was a great course that taught us about the Holocaust. So why not? Is there a course about African-American history, African-American art, anything pertaining to race? There needs to be a course on that, and I don't see why there isn't one. 2, increase diversity training and the diversity of teaching staff, administration, and disciplinary figures. Our schools are widely underrepresenting Black faculty, and that has been mentioned by everyone who has spoken so far. To combat this, I think we can start a diversity initiative with a goal to have a minimum of 15% of your employees be non-white, with at least 1 Black teacher in each school's history department, as well as 1 Black counselor per school to be available for Black student mental health and reports of racism. And all security guards, teachers, and administrators should also go through mandatory anti-racism training at the beginning of each school year. 3, regularly scheduled assemblies or workshops with guest speakers to address issues of racism, whiteness, and other forms of systemic injustice and violence. Barlow has done a great job of providing its students with amazing, powerful guest speakers, but I never saw one that spoke out about racial injustice, white privilege, and/or police brutality. I recognize that a change in curriculum and textbooks will take a long time, but inviting diverse guest speakers can be a great step, and one that we should implement first into all grades. 4, holding students who do or say disciplinary or offensive things accountable for their actions. This can be achieved by adding a strict 0 tolerance of racism in the student handbook. This way, when a student reports racism, there is no room for ignorance when disciplinary action is enforced. There must also be a ban on the N-word being used in educational settings. 5, use Black History Month as a mandatory dive into Black history for all grades. And I also think that Black history shouldn't just be taught on this month. It should be taught throughout history classes, and we can vary in depth depending on the grades. I know some topics are more difficult to talk about to younger ages, but it's important to talk about even for younger ages. We can do this by celebrating the achievements of Black activists, artists, professionals, and culture, and moving up in grades, begin introducing the harsh reality of systemic racism and the lasting impact of racism in every area of Black Americans' life. This is healthcare, education, employment, criminal justice system, etc. And finally, I also think it would be appropriate to send out an email to all students, teachers, faculty, parents, etc., explaining recent events in our country, providing resources for people to become educated, donate, and become active on the issue if they desire. And in this email also unequivocally state that as a school district, you acknowledge that Black Lives Matter and you are taking a serious look at your curriculum, faculty, and schools to ensure that you are valuing Black lives in your district. Black Lives Matter is not a controversial statement. It's not a political one, as long as you understand that the goal is for all lives to matter, which will only happen once Black Lives Matter. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say in this meeting, and thank you for having it.
Thank you, Layla. I see Amanda Neville.
Wait, I'm unmuted. Hi, everyone. I'm not very computer savvy. I'm Amanda Neville. I live on Black Rock Turnpike in Reading. I've prepared a short statement for this evening. I would like to share some thoughts regarding the teaching of African American history in the Reading school system. It is shamefully lacking. We need a complete overhaul of this curriculum, and it should include lessons in civil rights history, the real history of slavery, and how it impacts African American and Black people to this day. Children should be required to participate in Jane Elliott's Brown Eye, Blue Eye experiment beginning in 4th grade, starting this year and going forward. Children in all of the schools who are older than that should be required to participate in this experiment as well. It should be the first thing that happens every year. This will create empathy and understanding for children as they learn about the real history of this country with their new curriculum. We need to have more educators in our classrooms and as administrators who are African American or Black. Their perspective needs to be shared with and taught to our children. Reading needs a significant change in the way we teach our children about this history. What we are doing is not enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda. I see no further hands up. Oh, I see Heather is waving at me.
You should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi. I just have one quick thing to say. I jumped in a little late on this.
Can you state your name and street, please?
Heather Satin, Farview Farm in Reading.
Thank you.
So I jumped in a little late, so I didn't hear the whole beginning of this whole thing, but I just wanted to say that I have reached out to the middle school and high school so many times to say that I would fund a program for Holocaust survivors to speak to the classes. I'm not going to get into what my kids say about what goes on in school right now, and it never happened in middle school, and it was so many times. In high school, finally after 3 years, I was able to give names, but solely for the Mad Men class. But what I cannot understand is, doesn't the administration know that the kids who want to learn about what's going on in our world are taking this Mad Men class? What you want to do is reach out to the kids who don't care about what's going on in our world. And like everyone says, if you can change one person from having to listen to a Holocaust survivor or anything different from their norm or what goes on in, their homes, or a person they've never met before, or a story they've never heard. I can't believe that I was always denied when I was going to fund the program. And you only would have to do this. It would take 1 hour of their whole entire high school, because they'd only have to hear it once. They don't have to hear it every year. But out of 4 years that they could not take 1 hour to listen to what occurred to them. So I'm willing, and I don't know if my kids are going to come back next year. It depends on how the teaching is going to go, but I'm happy to fund it while I still live in Reading.
Thank you, Heather. I don't see any other public comments, so we will move on to board member comment. And why don't we start with Reading, and I'll use it as an opportunity to take the role, which I failed to do before. Heather?
Well, first of all, I like to see so many people attending meetings and speaking up. Thank you all. I know that it is not easy for everybody to do that. And I don't know if you were going to mention the graduation flip grids that we saw. I thought that was really fantastic. I mean, looking through that middle school flip grid, that every teacher made a comment, had a message for the kids. I thought that was really something special, and I enjoyed a lot of what the kids had to say also. And I would like to tell the kids congratulations on all your moving up ceremonies.
Thank you, Heather. Colleen?
Are you just doing roll now, or you want our board member comment?
I want to make sure you're there, and if you have a board member comment, you can make it also.
Okay. So
2 for 1.
Okay, hold on just a sec. I'm taking notes here, so I have my hands full. So yes, okay. First, I want to say happy last day of school. Yay, to our staff and students, and congrats to the graduates that aren't in the elementary school and middle school, and also those stepping up to JRMS or Barlow in the fall. So many challenges faces here, and you did it, and well done. I'm grateful to have attended the virtual RES Stepping Up ceremony this morning. A big thank you to the crew that put that together and really did their best to hold on to an RES tradition, even given the challenges of distance learning. A super duper special shout out to Mr. Amodio, who gave an awesome commencement address. My whole family is talking about you now, and we were super impressed. We really appreciated that. I don't know, I've been going back and forth in my mind when to thank Dr. McMorran. I think people have heard at this point that he has decided to retire. And I want to, in my head, I know that I am supposed to be happy for every staff member who chooses to move on. But in my heart's quite heavy hearing this news, and I am sad to see you go. I'm sorry that as a community, we were not able to get it together enough to take stronger action towards Dr. McMorran's vision of a school of the future. Dr. McMorran is a visionary, and we missed an opportunity there. So thank you for your many years of service, guidance, mostly patience. Thank you for educating me. You taught me what our school system is and what it could be. And thank you for watching over Reading's most important asset, don't let anyone fool you, which is our school system, including our staff and most importantly, our students. I am so pleased to see the people here tonight speaking in public comment. And I wanted to acknowledge the people who took the time to email us directly. That takes a lot of effort, and I really appreciate it. I agree with you that there are opportunities to do better, but I also know that there is more going on than what might be obvious from the surface. And so I just encourage the conversation to include giving the administration a chance to explain what is already happening. And then we can challenge them to take action on what else can be done. I was super intrigued by what JRMS, the proposal of the social justice virtual chat. I was super intrigued by that. And I'm unclear on the exact content of what was planned there, but I so appreciate the initiative that was taken there. And I was disappointed to find out that it had to be delayed and that we weren't able to get together some way to collectively support families during this difficult time. But I also get this is super delicate and a super delicate subject, and we don't want to get it wrong. But I am of the opinion, and I engage in conversation about this, that I don't want to let perfection get in the way of our progress. So yes, I'm here, and that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Colleen. Mike.
Hey, Chris, I'm here.
All right, thank you. John.
Thanks, I'm here, and I wanted to thank everyone who spoke up during public comment, especially some of the new faces and the younger faces, and make sure that they're aware that we do hear them, even though we can't respond to specific public comments. And I would echo the thanks for the letters as well. I had a chance to quickly look through the flip grids as well, and that was really great to see. A lot of great work as well as a lot of fun work involved in that. And I think it was a great culmination of what's been going on over the last 6 weeks.
Thank you, John. And Stephanie is absent tonight. Chris Hocker?
Yes, well, first of all, yes, I'm here. And secondly, I just want to echo one thing that Colleen said, which is that I think it's important to understand what is being done, what has been tried or not tried, and may have been done well or not well, and sort of get a basis from which to work. In other words, I'm all in favor of prescribing the right actions, but you have to have a basis for creating such a prescription.
Thank you, Chris. And I would just add for my comment to acknowledge and thank Jeff Parker, who was the chair of the Easton Board of Education for, I think, 6 long years, and to thank him for his service and leadership and our partnership over the past few months through not the easiest of circumstances. And on the other side of that coin, welcome John Stinson to leadership in Easton, and I look forward to partnering with you guys and continuing our work across the 2 districts.
Thank you, Chris. So roll call and comments, we can take the same approach. I'll go in alphabetical by last name. Jenny Cheetah. Okay. I know she joined earlier, but I think she maybe fell off. Gretchen Goldstein.
Hi there. I'm also taking notes, sorry. So I would just also like to thank Jeff for his years of service, and also thank John for taking the new role for leadership on our board. And I really am impressed with and thankful for the comments that many of you have brought to our attention, and do agree, let's have a starting point in terms of asking questions, figuring out what has and is, being planned, and then go from there and be serious about it.
Thank you. Randy? Nope, okay. Jeff?
Yes, I'm here, and would like to thank all the people that have spoken so far. I think the dialogue is wonderful. I think it's necessary, and as we continue to move forward, I hope this isn't the last meeting that you attend, and that you keep coming and keep helping us get to where we want to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And Katie?
Here. And I also want to thank all the people who were speaking in public comments, especially the young people, because it's not easy to come into a forum like this with a bunch of adults and to then speak so eloquently on such an important topic. So thank you very much, and for giving us your perspectives as young people as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. For my part, yeah, thank you. Definitely echoing what Katie is saying. Thank you to the young people showing up and helping us all, make sure that we're focused on the right priorities. Make sure that we keep our eye on the ball, and also echo what Jeff said. Please keep us honest and keep attending and keep talking about it. It's too easy to forget and be distracted by, some other terrible events oftentimes these days. And this is the kind of thing that we can't forget about. We have to stay focused on. So thank you for that. Also, quick thank you to Jeff. His mentorship over the course of my entire time on the board, and especially within these last few months where he agreed to stay on beyond what would have been his natural term as chair, make sure to shepherd the sort of the Eastern Board of Education through the process of the budget. It would have been a disaster. You know, you have some new guy in there trying to make sense of it, who hadn't been on the board very long. And Jeff, you know, to his credit, took the time, invested a lot of time on phone calls with me and making sure that I understood what was what. And you know, not everybody would have done that, and I appreciate it immensely. So thank you for your mentorship. I think that's it for me.
All right. Before we move on to discussion and possible action, I'd like to entertain a housekeeping motion for the Reading agenda only, which would be to add between 7 and 8 on the agenda, which is between board member comment and adjournment, a new item 8, which would be 8A, memorandum of agreement with Reading custodians, 8B, lawn care at RES and JRMS, and then 9 would be public comment round 3, and then 10 would be adjournment, and that would be specific to the Reading agenda only. So the intent being that the Easton board would adjourn before we hit those Reading specific items. So I'd look for a motion from a member of the Reading board to amend the agenda in that way. Mike, is there a second?
I'll second.
Heather, is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, to quickly vote. Heather.
Yes.
Colleen.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
I vote yes. The motion carries 6-0. The agenda for Reading only is so amended. Moving on to discussion and possible action. The first item is distance learning and reopening plan update. And I would introduce Dr. McMorrin to start that conversation.
I'm going to hand that right on to Dr. Pearson-Ugal with the acknowledgement of her really unflagging efforts in the last several months, and where the rest of the faculty and staff are going to get a lovely respite from the efforts. Dr. Pearson-Ugal has had to pivot and charge into the reopening plan. Dr. Pearson-Ugal?
Thank you. So I'd like to begin by just extending my thanks and sincere gratitude to our staff, our teachers, our paraeducators, our school leaders, and then our students and families who found a way to upend the typical way of teaching and learning to make distance learning work. It wasn't perfect, but there was a lot of learning that occurred, whether it was learning that was designed to occur or learning that occurred as a result of a crisis that no one here could possibly predict. So I'm grateful for everyone who jumped in and managed this situation really as well as we could. Our survey closed on Friday. Our parents survey asked parents questions that would provide the second round of feedback regarding distance learning, and also provided input regarding opening. I'm just in the first stages of analyzing those results. I can tell you that we had 777 responses, so a really solid response rate. And I can say across all levels, there was general satisfaction with distance learning. That doesn't mean that there weren't many comments that were very specific to what could be improved, but there was general satisfaction. In general, there's a desire for additional live instruction, in particular in small groups, not necessarily whole class, not necessarily for the entire period of time for any one content area, but in small groups in particular. There's also a desire for more non-academic meeting time should distance learning need to continue. So opportunities for students to connect with counselors, to connect in clubs, to connect in social groups in one form or another, so that we can also support their social and emotional needs as well. There's also a desire for more differentiated instruction, ways that we can extend learning, enrich learning, and provide more targeted instruction for those that need reinforcement. As of today, I've conducted 11 of 13 focus groups. The focus groups have included teachers, parents, and paraeducators at all levels. The focus groups have been tremendously informative and useful. And I would say in those focus groups, I've had a basic reinforcement of what was in the survey, but with greater detail. There's some mixed feelings about whether a very specific mandated schedule would be best or whether a flexible schedule would be best, and in part having to do with parents' varied work schedules and the demands on families and how challenging it is to manage one's job while also providing instruction at home. There's also a desire for additional training and support for everyone involved. Parents who requested training, parents who expressed concern that perhaps they weren't getting it right, and what would this mean for their child moving forward? And some real worries that were expressed in those focus groups. And finally, there's a clear desire on the part of staff and parents for more defined expectations. What should the program include? What should the time allotment across a week include? And I think that information was very helpful and will certainly inform next steps. So from there, I would like to move to a graphic with my gratitude to John Stinson, who helped put together the visual that you will see, that I think will provide a helpful overview of our reopening planning. So you've seen in a written update that there are essentially approximately 6 categories in our reopening planning, and you can see those displayed here in the inner circle. Health and safety, facilities, food services, scheduling, transportation, and academics. You can then see the next outer circle with a level of detail for each one of those categories. Now, I want to be clear in saying that the outer circle is not the entire list. This is sort of the next tier. There's a great deal of overlap between the categories, as one can imagine, certainly with health and safety. Health and safety plays into every one of those categories. So this gives you a sense, though, of the scope of our planning as we move through to just get the big categories and then the subcategories within each one. We can move to the next slide. Many people have asked, when will you know? When can you share a plan? And we can all certainly understand the eagerness to have some definition around what school will look like next year. So I put together this slide, which includes the process of reopening planning and then also the critical decision points. So you can see that it begins with, on the left-hand side, the concept. And the concept is essentially each one of those categories. A concept could be transportation. A concept could be our requirement to provide food service. We go from concept to exploration and research, from exploration and research to planning, and planning is typically at the building level, and then from plan to implementation, and then from implementation to analysis and evaluation. Much of the work in each one of the categories will occur prior to the state informing us of a decision regarding reopening. So all of the concepts have already been identified and then researched to some degree. For some of the categories, we are already in the planning stage, and I'll provide some detail on that later. In some cases, once a state provides us with parameters, we can begin to implement those plans, and then that will move across, and then finally, analysis and evaluation. So after the state informs us of a plan, then as soon as possible, we want to move into action to be able to communicate to parents and to staff what the fall will look like. What will it entail in terms of schedule, in terms of transportation, in terms of every one of those categories. And then the other really key point is the first day of school for staff and then the first day of school for students. I included both of those dates because I want to reinforce the fact that when we're talking about training, when we're talking about the need for teachers to revise curricula and to reconnect with one another as they plan for how they will form new communities with their students, whether that's in person or virtually, they have 2 days to do that. And that's on top of all of the necessary annual training that needs to occur. In Region 9, they have just 1 day to do that. So that's really just to keep in the back of our minds. If we move to the next slide. So the planning stages, as I said, include the different steps of concept, exploration, plan, implement, and analyze. I want to give you a status update, brief status update for each one of the categories. As I've shared before, we began with health and safety. That's what's most critical, and we're really in the planning stages there. With facilities, we are between exploration and planning, but certainly doing the evaluation of each building. The same with food service, the same with scheduling, and you can see transportation is not quite as far along. Mr. Rice and I have a meeting this week with First Student, and then we will have them meet with a larger team next week. And academics are happening all along, but many of the academic decisions will go hand in hand with scheduling and planning for next year. On the slides that follow, I attempted to provide some detail for each one of the categories, just so that you could get a sense of how we take each one of those categories and unpack them. I'm not going to review every one of the slides in detail, but I think it provides just a thumbnail sketch of the process that's a little bit different for each one of the categories. When we began with health and safety, we started by engaging our nursing coordinator, and we have purchased the immediate supplies that we will need for the first month of school. And if we are not actually in session, then we're confident that those supplies will certainly come in handy down the road. Moving on to the next category, to facilities. And you can see the key considerations here. Some of this work can occur now. Some of it is really dependent on the parameters that are provided by the state. Food services, determining how they will eat, where they will eat, and who will supervise them. Transportation. Now, I will say in the survey results, the parents at this point in June have indicated that somewhere between 33 and 35%, depending on the level, do not intend to send their children on the bus. We know, of course, we're required to provide transportation. And so if a parent changes their mind, then we certainly need to provide the transportation, but that's a lower level of ridership than we typically have. Scheduling. Scheduling is very complex. I'm sure that we've all read about the experiences in other states and other countries, really looking at all in, all out, or some form of hybrid. We can quickly eliminate the hybrid models that would require us to double our bus runs or provide double the staffing. It's just not realistic for us. And so we don't spend a lot of time on those models. And then academics. The academic work is happening all along. This will require, I will be honest with you, far more time than our summer curriculum budgets will possibly allow. We need to engage as many teachers as possible in this process. It is being led by content leaders when those content leaders exist. We do not have content leaders for all of the subject areas. So this is work that has begun and it will be ongoing, but it will need to continue into next year because we simply do not have, we don't have the budget, and frankly, our teachers need a little bit of a break. So we need to have a time for them to come up for air and then re-engage in the process of curriculum revision and planning for a model that would be flexible, whether we are going to be in school and considering the need for distancing practices and no longer sharing supplies, or whether we're planning for a distance learning model or somewhere in between, which would be the hybrid. With that, I'm happy to take questions.
I have some. This is Colleen. Thank you, first of all. And you know, how many crises can we have at once? And I just want to, I didn't include you in all my thanks in the beginning, and I want to thank you for all the work and with your crew and the focus groups and everyone who's participating now. Thank you very much. I have, my first concern is that when you have a focus group, help me understand how you manage the expectations of a focus group so that in the end, when they've given you feedback that they want something a certain way and there seems to be agreement, but then the state says you can't have it that way, how do you manage the expectations of the focus group so that we don't end up with clusters of very disappointed parents because they gave their feedback and I am doing air quotes, you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes, and we didn't listen. That's, I'll leave it there. That's my first question.
So I'll say that I begin each one of the focus groups by saying that a focus group is not really the right name for what we're doing, because I'm not trying to sell them something, nor do I have anything to sell. I begin each focus group by explaining that my role for the next hour is to listen, and roughly structuring it to 30 minutes for distance learning feedback and 30 minutes for reopening input. I've shared with all of the staff groups and with all of the parents that while this is a first opportunity to participate in that type of a forum, that it won't be the last, that once we have more information and we're ready to begin to roll out a plan, then we will engage parents once again, that we do have certain requirements and the requirements aren't going to change. So there's not a lot of give and take in the focus groups. I am really there listening unless there's a question that can be easily clarified.
Okay, and then my next question or comment, all of this sounds very expensive, and just even the work, the prep work sounds like a lot of hours, and you know, at what point are you gonna, I mean, when do we get the feedback about our budget, that we have to adjust our expectations about our budget in order to be able to afford these items that seem to be, it looks to me to be very expensive. Are you anticipating that?
You know, we have some information, but the problem is that until we have the parameters, I don't think it would be a wise idea to process the purchase orders for the academic supplies that have been recommended or some of the other purchases, because we just don't know what will be expected. We've made some purchases. We've purchased some cleaning equipment. We've purchased some health and safety materials, but at this point, the only clear recommendation I could make is to provide time.
Thanks, Stephanie. These are obviously different times. Do we see the possibility of the state getting involved in any way that might enable us to maybe change our calendar around so that we can do more than just the 2 professional development days before we go back into class, and or maybe make some exception with regard to the busing, so that if you do opt out for 2021, we just kind of make that clear. Do we see anything where the state might give us some guidance or be as flexible as it was in the spring and the fall?
Well, the state no longer mandates our calendar. So that would really be a board decision to change the calendar. Of course, we would need to negotiate with our associations as well. I think Dr. McMorran maybe could speak to another update about the second part of your question.
This is part of the pressure that we're placing on the state. There are, as you saw in that graphic, dozens of decisions that have to be made. You have contractual arrangements with the Reading Education Association and the Reading Administrators Association and the paraprofessional and support staff. And while I'm commenting, we've thanked the teachers. We should also acknowledge that our para educators and support also have really done a tremendous amount to help our kids. I think the 2 boards might want to meet with union leadership to see if you can shift one of the PD days additionally to the beginning of the school year. You have the final day for teachers, which is generally the day after the kids are done in the spring.
In Easton.
And Easton. You've got a couple of days in Reading. You have different contract days for Easton and Reading teachers. This is kind of bleeding into your other item. As to transportation, what the statute says is that the board has a duty to transport kids. So if people opt out, they can opt right back in a couple days later. And it's probable that you wouldn't get enough people to commit to opting out that you could discontinue bus runs. You still have to run the buses over your 125 miles. It comes down to where people's homes are, not where the buses can go. So if more parents are going to drive their own kids, that would indirectly help us in that instead of having to put 25 kids or 35 kids on a bus, maybe you have half or fewer of that, and then you can space them out and not have to add bus runs. The statute says 900 hours, which is 180 days, and we have not had any movement from the state on that at the moment. And I think where the State Department of Education and the governor's office right now is they are in dialogue with the Connecticut Education Association and the AFT-CT, the Federation of Teachers, about this question of reopening.
Other questions for Stephanie from either board?
Could I ask one, Chris? Stephanie, I made the mistake of looking at a Facebook thread not too long ago, and I got the impression, and I was just going to ask you, this goes back to your survey results, that, people seem to be terribly polarized. I love distance learning. My son or daughter is doing great. Or I hate distance learning and everyone's going backwards. Was it in fact that polarized? And I mean, was there more nuance to it? How would you generally characterize it?
Yeah, it certainly was not a split. A much higher percentage of parents shared satisfaction. We provided the Goldilocks options, not enough, too much, just right. And just right was the most common answer, except for the category I shared with respect to non-academic meeting opportunities. I don't have our survey monkey account only allows so many people to be in it at any one time. So I think it's being worked on right now, but the percents are higher certainly in terms of the satisfaction. The next time that we get together, or I can just put together a report to share as soon as I have a chance to summarize, which should be in the next week or so. It's certainly not a split. It's much closer to between 60 and 70%, I would say, saying it was just about right. And then a much lower number of people who were dissatisfied.
It was just about right for the context of us all stampeding into it and creating it as we went. We want, if there is a resumption of distance learning, we want it to be by design with schedules that are set in advance. I think the uniform request for people is direct synchronized instruction that has a purpose and is something we require the kids to attend, and that has to happen through planning and scheduling and professional development.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So I'll just add that a number of people commented that they understood the challenges of going into distance learning so abruptly and how challenging this was for all involved, but with a hope that the next time around, should there be a next time, it would need to improve.
Thanks.
Other questions, either board?
Stephanie, a question from Mike Hoffman here. Would it be safe to say that we really just have no idea what school's going to look like in the fall until after the state speaks on the issue?
No idea what it's going to look like. I mean, I think that we've seen 2 states close by already make the decision to reopen their buildings. I think if they decide to reopen our buildings, the big question will be the distancing requirements, because that will be the driver of whether we need to go into a hybrid model or whether we can bring all the students back. If the buildings are safe to open and we don't need to provide a 6-foot distance, then we can get everyone back in. It's the 6-foot distance that really challenges us in terms of the size of our facilities and maintaining a quality program. We don't want to simply spread the kids out just so we can get them in and not have them have an appropriate and challenging and supportive academic experience.
But I think we can say, let's think of a continuum. On the ideal side is a complete return to school with no concern about COVID, which is obviously an extreme that's not going to happen this year. One hopes it'll happen at some point. On the other extreme is complete distance learning with no hope of physical contact, and what they're calling it in our professional stuff now is click or brick. You know, am I coming into the brick and mortar, or am I clicking? Then there's the hybrid options between the two ends. Would we be in session for all of the 5 days of a week, for some portion of it, for a morning or afternoon session? Would some of the kids, say pre-K through grade 6, be coming in for instruction, and older kids who are better able to monitor themselves, 7, 12, be on a distance learning as a way to accommodate space and cost needs? So we know that we're going to have to focus on the core and essential elements of instruction. We know that we're going to have to figure out how to do science labs and physical education and the other elements of instruction that you need to be present for: occupational therapy, physical therapy, music, and what we're all pushing for is some kind of framework from the state to say, here's one end, here's the other end, figure out in the middle. What I believe is going to happen is the state will ultimately provide some direction, but not requirements, other than hygienic and safety and COVID related. I'll say gratis without any evidence at all, so take it all with a pound of salt. I think that what we saw in Rhode Island was they sat down and the governor probably said to her educational people, what would it cost to do everything we want to do to keep the program running and the kids safe? And they probably said $200 million. And she said, okay, we're going to open the schools in the fall. I think that that Vermont might be in a different position geographically than we to try to be more to come back to return. What I'm hoping is that whatever happens, Fairfield County as a cluster has a similar approach so that you don't have in and out and back and forth. But it still is, as there's no one in this of the 67 people here, 69 people here, more eager than Dr. Pearson-Ugal to get some direction from the state. And what we're hearing is, what they've been telling us for 2 weeks is you'll hear it within 2 weeks. I do think by the end of June, we'll have some kind of direction. And then the charge back to us is, given the size of the building and the resources you have, how do you have to space the kids in the program, and what has to give and what do you keep? And that's why you saw that comprehensive graphic that we're working on now.
Thank you.
I'll just add that our research and planning continues, even in the absence of parameters from the state. And so the hope is that we're far enough along so that when the state does provide those parameters, we're ready to move forward and communicate information to staff and to families and engage people once again in discussions and begin our training plans. So if they told us their decision tomorrow, then we would not be ready to communicate anything out because we're not far enough along in our planning. If we have another 2 weeks to plan and they happen to make the decision right away, then we're going to be in a different place. But it's not as if we're waiting for information to research or to plan the different options. All of that is occurring concurrently.
Is there an effort to, this is Colleen, is there an effort to work with the other schools in Fairfield County, so aligned with what Dr. McMorran was just saying, so that we are all operating similarly?
Work in what way, Colleen?
So I remember that map, I can't remember the name of that group, but they sent us a survey with some pretty actually entertaining questions, I'll say. But it was our area of the map. There was a
the Regional Service Center. Yep.
Thank you. Are we working with them as we start to make our plans?
We are absolutely coordinating with the systems that are contiguous with us. That we're on once a week with the Greater Danbury region, the Western districts, and then we're on once a week with the Southern Fairfield County groups, and both of those are coordinating through CAPS, the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. So yes.
But keep in mind that this all also depends on, we can say that we would hope that all Fairfield County would be doing the same thing, but if, you know, Darien says we're going to buy a whole bunch of trailers so that everybody can go to school every day and only have 10 kids in a class, Reading and Easton aren't going to do that. So we're also limited by what the state wants and what our towns will pay.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, comments, concerns with respect to distance learning or reopening from either board? All right. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Tom. The next item is release time for fall PD. I don't know if Tom or Stephanie wants to lead the charge on exactly what that looks like.
Yep. We had very willing teachers who, like the rest of the world, jumped in on the 16th of March or whenever we did it into distance learning, and you gave them one day, which they were so grateful for, to try to figure out how to move forward. And then we saw a steady acceleration from that day forward as grade level teams started to work and coordinate. My read of it is that grade level teams, K-8, figured out how not to be redundant in their planning. It wasn't 5 teachers doing separate stuff. It was people doing it together. But we also tiptoed into the live access, live meeting with kids. And for every person who says, I absolutely want 7 hours a day of kids in front of the screens and direct instruction. You've got other people saying, I absolutely don't want that. So the decision can't be made exclusively at the personal preference of the community at large. We need to hear from that, but it's got to be pedagogical in our approach. What's best for the kids, and then what can we deliver? And I would love to see us go into the fall with a much sharper understanding of there will be direct instruction, there will be live synchronous work. It should not be where we took the school day and put it in front of a camera. It should be the design of distance learning, which means new groupings of kids, small subject-related kids, whole class instruction, and we start to phase out some of the optional aspects to it. I am not going to forget, and I hope that those of you who continue in this good work, that you have people who are both members of parents, both members of the healthcare profession, both working at night. So when we say your kid's got to be on a screen from 9 until 3, and they say that's when we sleep, we've got to be flexible enough to acknowledge all that, make it work. What I'm building towards is take anybody from their profession in the context in which they are masters and put them into a different context, and suddenly they're not masters anymore. So what we would love to see is if we need to take the presumption we're returning to brick school, we would like to see predictable and regular time for the teams of teachers to be working in the early return to school against the possibility of a return to distance learning. In other words, what I'm asking for is about 2 hours every 2 weeks of release time so that we can get the kids home and either keep the teachers together or keep them virtually together so we can afford them this ongoing time to give people what everybody is asking for, which is do what we did this spring better. And to make it better, it can't be something we say to teachers, just figure it out on your own. We've got to provide them with time and structure. From my poking around and paying attention and talking with people, I think we've seen enormous capacity growth at each level, but not in each classroom. I think it's fair to say we now have people who have comfort and facility with distance instruction that they didn't have before. And on any learning curve where I was following some world language and science at the high school very closely, people saying, you know, in order to come up with a 20-minute presentation, it took me 5 hours of work, and then that collapses as they get better at it. So I would love to say to the administrators and the teachers, here's a predictable amount of time regularly for you to continue this work of creating this alternative. And it's not our best alternative, but it seems to me that if we're looking down the road, that unless there's a miracle of a vaccine that can navigate at light speed through the FDA, what colleges appear to believe is that once the weather shifts out of summer mode, that there will be a return to distance learning. So what we think is, if we could give the administrators and the teachers, say every other Friday going into the school year, a 2-hour release, we understand that's an imposition on the parents, but if we give them time up early to figure out childcare and coverage, ultimately you're going to get better learning. I'm going to speak as an educator now. I know people are worried, did my child fall behind in the last couple of months? And what the research out of the Katrina taking out New Orleans was that you can recover pretty easily from a couple of months of lost instruction. If everybody is behind, your kid can't be behind. No one got ahead for your kid to be behind. The curriculum we got through is what we got through. And so people are like, well, tell me all the things that we didn't do this fall. And I think the focus should be, how do we give our kids some relief and let them be kids for the summer? How do we diagnose a lot of where we need to move forward and what needs to be adjusted in the content in the fall? And it's probably okay if we had 2.5, 3 months of disrupted learning, but it can't be turned into 3 months every year or 6 months or more. Then you would start to have an issue. So we think the least expensive way to make this move forward is to provide the time. We're less concerned about bringing in the expert. Colleen, I'm making bunny ears, because we don't know who that expert is. And I don't think you want to be spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to bring someone in from Columbia when, in my estimate, we have internally in the faculty people that can lead this themselves if we give them the time.
So, Tom, are you looking for action tonight to amend the calendar? Are you looking for consent to move forward with this approach? How can we support, or what's your request?
I think at the moment we're looking for approval of the concept and guidance, and then we would probably come back to you in July with, here's a calendar that we're hoping to have you adopt. We absolutely would love Easton and Reading to have parallel structure. A couple of things we want to look at are how to set this up so that we're not taking kids out of the same fine or practical arts at the same, every single time you're missing music. So it would be on us to schedule around it. I think if we make it as predictable as possible for families, it's easier for them to then schedule to accommodate. So at the moment, we're looking for conceptual approval, and we'd come back with, here's our calendar proposal in July, which would give us time to get it out to people.
Any questions or comments on the proposal?
What's the downside? How does it change the experience of, this is Colleen again, how does this change the experience of being a student in our schools? What do they feel?
It's how much time we allow for release is, time is a budget like money, and we allocate it in the way we think is best. Many elite private schools provide this as a matter of course all the time. I remember being at a conference once, and the question was, how many hours do you give your teachers to work on professional development? And the answer was, for most people, it was like 6 or 8 2-hour chunks. And this woman goes, 144. And because she was in a private school that they just sent the kids home every Friday. I'm not asking for that. I think this is targeted important time. I'd rather have that than a whole bunch of days before we get started. I mean, I'd love to have time before the kids show up, but I'd rather have it that they can work and reinforce and keep coming back. Gretchen?
So my children were in a school district in Miami-Dade County that did this. That's just was part of the school system every Wednesday. I think it's brilliant. And I thank you for bringing that. And I'm also an educator. So I do think that the, spending time every other week is going to, especially if there is, some sort of continued learning curve. I just think that that's an excellent proposal. I don't think that my children in their former school system were any worse off at all. So I think that's a great idea.
It seems to me that wherever we are on the continuum between click and brick, there'll be positive use of the time, whether it's to figure out how we're going to maintain hygiene protocols or how we're going to prepare for another shift back to distance, because the first couple of days in August, if we're going back to brick and mortar for sure, are probably going to be taken up more so with hygiene training than the usual beginning of year PD. So that's still got to find its way in somehow.
I would, here's gratuitous, but I would love by the end of September to be saying to you or have Stephanie say, we now feel like we don't need to have snow days. We could just go to distance learning days because we figured it out, and just keep on your calendar. That the state was wholeheartedly opposed to that, but I think that now we'll have a different view of that. So.
I also want to applaud the thoughtful approach. I think when we met a couple of last week or the week before with the Easton board, and we talked about the possibility of funding a consultant to come in and sort of share their wisdom. I think it was clear that you were considering that, and I think you went back and you said, you know what, we've got rock stars who have this figured out, and giving them the ability to share that with their peers and to share best practices. I think that's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, in general, I think we should use the HIFITS technical adaptive model. Like if it's a technical problem, bring in an expert who can say, this is how you do it. If it's about how you adapt to human interaction and all kinds of people coordinating, just give people time.
Great.
I think it's a great idea for all of the reasons already said. I just wish that there was a way to have some distance learning to beef up the distance learning for the people who weren't so adept at it, so that we're not off to a lurching start in the fall and we can hit the ground running. I mean, I understand.
I agree.
Vacation days and all that, but.
Yep. So this is why you all agreed to be on a board of ed or a board of finance or a board of selectmen. What is politics? It's the allocation of limited resources against competing good ends. How does that impact the multiple crises we're going through? We're going to ask you to spend money on COVID-19 hygiene and prevention. We're going to ask you to spend money on professional development for distance learning, and we're going to ask you for funding and support so that we can work on the race questions that have been raised earlier today. And you have limited resources, so you're going to have to allocate.
Any other questions, comments, concerns about the proposal? It sounds to me like there's been no real dissent from the idea, so I would invite Tom and Stephanie to come back with a more concrete proposal for our July meeting or meetings. And there's discussion that we might consolidate again in July, but we'll cross that bridge in the next couple of weeks. If there's no further discussion on release time for fall PD, we move on to 4C, which is diversity and inclusion in curriculum. And John and I had asked Stephanie and Tom to give us sort of an overview of the extent to which diversity and inclusion are part of the curriculum now, which I think touches on Chris Hawker's comment earlier in the meeting about understanding what the baseline is, with the full understanding that right now, Stephanie and the rest of the administrative team are also balancing everything we've discussed already tonight, distance learning and reopening. So there was not an expectation for a comprehensive presentation, but a look into what is involved in the curriculum right now. So Stephanie?
I'll start that off and then pass it over to Stephanie. Can I have screen sharing enabled, please?
Yes. Probably the best way, Chris, if you make Tom a co-host.
Sure.
As we get started, and thank you, again, we're not trying to take you into a 2-hour conversation right now. We want to give you a sense of where we are. I have on occasion suggested to folks that you do something that I myself do, which is at least once a week. If you're used to watching Fox News, then you put on MSNBC for half an hour. If you're used to MSNBC, put on Fox News for half an hour. If you are neither one of them, go to BBC World News or CNN. Just I'm asking all of us to broaden our vision of how information is passed back and forth, because I think what we'll see is of all of the biases and microaggressions that we want to think about, we are projecting some of them unnecessarily. I do want to talk for a few minutes and then have Stephanie give you a more formal statement. And that's why I asked for the ability to share the screen. I'd like to introduce you to Matthew Thomas Levy, 6'3", as you can see, an athlete. His name Thomas is my name Thomas. This is my nephew. Matthew is a sophomore at the University of Massachusetts, and Matthew cannot wear a sweatshirt with a hood for fairly obvious reasons. I would like to introduce you to Grandpa, who's my dad. And he's with several of his grandchildren, my Yankee from Maine father, who did not meet a person who was not white until he was a teenager because he was from a farm in Maine, has 10 grandchildren. 2 of them are Chinese in ethnic origin. 2 of them are multi-race, including Indian and Native American, and 1 of them is biracial, and the other 5 are Caucasians. Welcome to my family, people that I love. That's my daughter crouching down in the front. The reason I'm sharing that is I want us to approach these issues, and to borrow a phrase from President George W. Bush, by creating a coalition of the willing. Rather than assume that people are unwilling to address this issue, let's take the other assumption. Frankly, we'll get a lot farther by going there. And I am so delighted and thrilled to see the passion and the conviction of those young graduates who were speaking earlier. I want to harness that energy and put it to good work. Next week on the 23rd, Region 9 is having a board meeting at which we've been asked to present some of the curriculum related to race and to identify some of the texts. If I'm being a little pedantic, it's because I think people think that absolutely nothing has been done and we have to start from scratch. Susan Kaplan and Diane Martin, but now Phyllis Amori, 3 years ago started to have folks from the Anti-Defamation League present to both of our middle schools. Guess what happened this spring? We weren't able to have that presentation. But I sat last year at John Reed for an hour and a half. Frankly, I was walking in just to say hi and see what was going on in the Commons room, and I stayed because I was mesmerized by Christina Gray presenting to the kids video clips of racially tense situations and then guiding them through thinking about how would you approach or resolve this issue. I was so delighted to hear earlier someone offering to help out with Holocaust survivor awareness. That's a person with whom I have not spoken. So I'd welcome contact to me, tmcmoran@er9.org. Dr. Amori had arranged for Judith Altman, a Holocaust survivor, to come speak with our kids this spring. Guess what happened? It had to be canceled. I used to work over in Ridgefield, and I had the honor to meet Joseph Kempler back in about 20 years ago or so, a survivor who would come and speak with our kids. It was profound and moving and helped us all be more aware folks. We had Joanne Freiberg, who was the state climate expert on bullying prevention, who developed a great relationship with us, not the least of which being that Dr. Pinn said her doctoral dissertation will be about climate and creating environments that are safe for kids. That's what her research is into. And so Dr. Freiberg was on her committee. She's presented for us in elementary and middle school and high school on adverse childhood experience training. Separately, she presented to the entire elementary and middle school faculty on bias awareness and anti-racism. I have some of her materials from that from those workshops, and we are keenly interested in this work. But I can't haywire and bail wire and do it on our own by getting the friend of one of our employees to come do things for free. And I am going to be completely PC right now. I know you guys are thinking he's leaving, his filter is falling apart. It's true. But we have heard a lot of conversation about defunding police. And I don't want to wade into that. But I will say that over the 5 years that I've tried to help put budgets together, we have consistently been unable to fund professional development, summer curriculum work, and to give the principals a big enough hiring allowance, not to hire the best person at MA Step 1 they could find, but to let them hire anybody. We offered with great excitement 2 weeks ago in Easton the position of psychologist to an African American who was dynamite. And that person said, I'm sorry, I can't take a job for MA Step 1. And we said, I'm sorry, that's all the money we have. So that person went to another district. And in the conversation that Sue had with her, she said, you know, it's partially the money, but it's also that I would, as an African-American psychologist, I want to work with a more diverse student body. 2 weeks ago, we hired a job to an Hispanic American math teacher who we thought was dynamite. It is simply not true if people say, oh, I know what you're going to say. We're going to hire the best person disregarding race. I don't assume that the best person isn't a person of color. And I would love to hire folks. But that person declined the job offer saying, I want to take a job where my student teaching was because it was a more diverse student body. Vicki Cram and I attended the minority recruitment fair the year before last. And if we're going to be reflectively thinking about difficult things, we went to East Hartford. There are about 30 school systems there. We had a couple positions opening. We talked to a lot of great folks. And I could just throw in that the research is definitive that the more diverse the faculty is, the better student performance is. It's a correlative research. You want to have better performance, have a more diverse faculty. And we had thought, because we were going to East Hartford, to bring a map of Connecticut. And I had highlighted Easton and Reading, and folks would go, oh yeah, sure, where is this position? I'd go, it's here. And they'd say, oh, I live in Torrington. You know, that's too much for me. It's too big of a drive. I don't know if I'd be able to get an apartment down there. So we pivoted and we went to the Resk down in Trumbull and we said, could you put together a minority recruitment fair for people who are coming out of UB and Sacred Heart and Fairfield and UConn, Stanford? And guess what happened? It didn't get held because of COVID. So I am really excited to hear that now there's attention being paid and people want to do this. And it's not my job to solve your problem. It's my job to say, if you want this, put some money behind it. Let us have some fun so we can actually go out and recruit people. And by the way, I have come to be very close with the former superintendent in Bridgeport, who said that they had the same kind of challenge in getting African American and other people to come to Bridgeport. So it is absolutely not a lack of desire to diversify our faculty. And can we all just take a moment not to put the handful of people who do work for us on any kind of special notice that they have to speak for all African American teachers, that they're good teachers. We're proud and pleased to have them. So the question of curriculum for me, and I'm speaking more extemporaneously here, Dr. Pearson will be more specific, is for your elementary school kids, here's what I want and what I don't want. What I want is for every child to look at every kind of profession or adult or field of life endeavor and go, that could be me. So I would love to see more of an investment in materials that allow us to have biographies and speakers and people where I'm not looking at a bunch of white people. I'm looking at mathematicians and scientists and business leaders and politicians and all of the range of pathways people can take. And we've done the work of saying that those doors are open to everybody. What I don't want is to say, yeah, slavery happened, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr., let's move on. That's what I think we all agree is insufficient. So I would, in addition to people in their own voices, I would love to see more funding where now I do want to bring in experts. I do want to bring in people who are experts in child pedagogy for multiracial communities and children of diverse backgrounds. That's a technical issue that I do want to address. I would love to see Dr. Pearson-Ugal not have to choose between refresher workshop for readers workshop or anti-bias training. And right now, what we've done, we've just become habituated to this. We just talked about it 20 minutes ago, is we'll do it in-house if you give us a little bit of time. And that's why let's just keep that George W. Bush coalition of the willing, because people want this. They want it to happen. The places where we've done well over time, I mean, I showed up to this great community in 2007, where there's a very strong straight gay alliance under Dale Bartram at the high school that worked extensively at the high school and with the middle schools. I think LGBTQ is something we have done well, but I would love to take this issue head on. And I am going to wind this up now because I know it's turning into a speech. The school is nested in the community. I can't solve teenage drinking based on what happens at the high school. You need the Easton Reading Community Coalition, the Caring Coalition, to take it on in the community. I can't solve vaping unless we take it on in the community. And I absolutely cannot solve the legacy we're trying to get rid of and the vision we have for a loving and inclusive school system. If it's a problem that the school had, why haven't you solved this problem also? It's got to be the community that says, we're going to be an open and inclusive community, and that means a much bigger conversation about realtors showing homes, about how the town presents itself to the world. And the criteria is pretty easy. When our white and black and brown and other kids don't feel the discomfort of being different, we'll know that we've gotten there. So I know that's a long speech, but it's not something we haven't been working on. And we're working on it without resources. Give us resources and you'll get more of what we all want. I think Dr. Pearson-Ugal has a more formal statement.
Thank you for allowing me just a few minutes to speak about multicultural literacy, civics, and social justice. Quite frankly, this is too important a topic for our students, for our staff, and our communities for me to provide a plan in haste for addressing concerns regarding multicultural education, civics, and social justice education, and simply move forward. Our first priority is to listen. I've been doing a lot of listening in the past couple of weeks regarding distance learning and reopening planning. At times, it's tempting to respond to concerns with an answer or corrective information that makes sense on some level, but also lacks needed recognition that a concern from one individual represents that person's voice from their experience. Recently, I listened to a speech by Chimamanda Adichie about the danger of a single story. Specifically, she spoke about the danger of the single story about people of color and the consequences of a narrow view of the world. It resonated with me because as educators, we do have the ability to ensure that our students are not creating an understanding of history, of families, or different perspectives through a single story. As an education community, we are rocked by the stories of racism and lack of social justice being voiced across our country, and more specifically in our towns, by parents, by students, by teaching professionals. We need to listen to different voices from different perspectives and consider how to support a move forward that includes a review of the K-12 curriculum across content areas, professional learning activities, including professional reading, and opportunities to gather input from parents, students, and staff to inform future plans. Our ability to fully address the topic will be shaped by the ability and commitment to carve out adequate time, secure needed resources for curriculum revisions, professional learning speakers, consultants, required staff reading, and include diverse voices in our planning. I've provided a tentative timeline that is perhaps ambitious, but I think includes the right components. Summer into fall, review current curriculum, including student text resources and past professional learning and professional reading. Fall of 2020, convene joint Board of Education Curriculum Committee to include teachers, administrators, and/or department chairs, Board of Ed members, parents, and possible diversity training and multicultural education consultants. Review existing curriculum. Review library materials and process for ordering. Review professional learning activities. Invite consultant to provide input. Create action plan for curriculum development. Create action plan for professional learning. Create action plan for community forums and presentations. Set end of year date for review of progress. Spring of 2021, review progress, make recommendations as needed, gather additional input from staff, parents, and students, and then continue the curriculum revision process. This is simply, as I said, too important a topic for us to jump in and make a couple of adaptive changes. We need to include the right voices, and we need to begin a review cycle that is broad, including those who participate and also the curriculum areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Are there any questions or comments from either board for either Tom or Stephanie on this topic?
I have a comment. So a couple of things. First of all, with all due respect, Dr. McMorran, I resent the framing of this as a political issue, and also the idea that we should be balancing one piece of political propaganda with another piece of political propaganda and suggest instead that people should do a better job of sourcing their news. That's a comment referring to balancing Fox News with MSNBC. I think do a better job of getting your news across the board and try to tune out the propaganda. A problem that I see here that is easily identifiable is that this conversation is taking place among all white members of boards of education, administrators, and teachers. So I completely appreciate the idea that this has to be well thought out and include lots of different voices and planning, and that it is very, very important. And I also would like the acknowledgement that this kind of thing has been brought up in the past and was not acted upon. For an example, Cheryl Graziano and I brought a proposal last year to have an increased civics curriculum that was shot down. We suggested a civics week that was shot down. So I love that there is community support for this now, and that maybe this will actually happen. But I think the one thing that we could do right now is to have a diversity and inclusion task force established among all of ER9, so that when we're having these conversations, it's not a bunch of white people. Because, for example, the proposed Social Justice Day at John Reed, I thought that was great. I looked at that material and I thought, this is fantastic. I'm a white woman. And I get a phone call from an African-American friend saying, please don't let them do this. Please don't let them do this. Because how is this going to be for the one Black kid in the all-white class with the all-white teacher talking about these difficult subjects? And I get it. I totally get it. And so, like, I agree, Stephanie, we need to be listening more. And I'm hoping that at the very least, we can take an actionable step tonight of establishing that task force that could work with the curriculum committee, with hiring. If you're gonna try to hire teachers of color, wouldn't it be a better approach if we're like, hey, we have this really active group of people that are involved in the schools, and we're all trying to do a better job, rather than it just being like, white people trying to lure you in. So I'm hoping that we can, at the very least, establish such a task force tonight. We don't have to say who's going to be on it, but just agree that we should do that.
I'd like to clarify that. What I'm saying is this should not be a political issue. It shouldn't be something that falls into right and left. This is something that should be the people who live in this town. You have liberals and conservatives and people who don't pay attention to politics. You have Democrats and Republicans and independents and libertarians. That I'm saying let's make this this community working on this issue. That's the point I'm trying to make there. The conversations that Dr. Mori was trying to coordinate there actually were run through our admittedly small staff. We do have a person of color on that staff who was actively engaged in the whole process. That I as I said earlier, I don't want to get into back and forth. I think this is an opportunity for you to do this, and you got to all do it together.
I agree with you. And but like to Stephanie's point, people of color are not a monolith. Just the same way all of us white people here have different political opinions and different ideas about everything. So we definitely need a wider net of resources that we can draw from. And I absolutely agree that this is an issue for our town. I had a conversation this past week with a member of the police department who said, what are we going to do about the racism in this town? And this is, you see what's on the news. Well, do you know how many times the Reading police are called because a white person saw a Black person walking down the road? It happens often. So this is something, and I don't know how we reach those people. It was brought up before, the people that need to be having these conversations, tune it out. They won't show up for a community-wide meeting. The Mark Twain Library tried to have a whole discussion on this, and those people wouldn't go to such a discussion, but their kids are in our schools. And so I would like to have, starting in pre-K, in September, at the very least, some anti-bias education going on, that we don't need to develop and create this. We're not reinventing the wheel. There are organizations that are wonderful organizations. Stephanie, I sent you last year the 1619 Project from the Pulitzer Foundation. And the answer that I was given was, well, we will review this and see if it meets our standards. It's the Pulitzer Foundation. So I think we can look to already established groups that have these curriculums developed for pre-K, for little kids, for kindergarten, and put those in the schools. And it doesn't even have to take the place of anything else. I mean, I don't know how many people here have ever taken an anti-bias or what's it called? The bias, the incentive bias quiz. It'll blow your mind. So that's the kind of thing that every kid can do. And we don't have to run it by our all-white curriculum committee.
Any other questions or comments or responses or?
I do. I have something.
Okay.
So just from a parent's perspective, this happened to me this year, and it happened to a few other friends, and that's why I'm aware of this. But as we incorporate new literature that hasn't, that we didn't grow up with, and it's new to us, and the subjects are new to us, the literature is teaching very important lessons, but especially if you're distance learning, because it's being, like, my daughter's in a read aloud, so they read a few chapters every day, and actually Dr. McMorrin read some of them, thank you very much. But so my daughter's listening to a book I've never heard before, and there are race related topics in the book, and I at first thought the school had gone off the rails because I didn't understand the full concept of the book. And in the end of the book, there is messaging and I get the whole picture. But because it's being a read aloud in distance learning, and it's a new title, there's no teacher support in the moment to explain to the kids or to have feedback or dialogue with the kids. That was falling on my shoulders, and because I hadn't read the book, I had a lot of apprehension, to be very honest about it, and I hung in there because I trust you guys, and there was a beautiful message in the end. I'm bringing this up because not only do we need to reach our students, we also need to help guide our parents, because this is very new for a lot of us, and I hope I'm not alone in saying that. And I think we need to also be prepared, especially if distance learning continues, to support our students as they encounter these new titles and books.
I would to echo that, the idea that parents need help. We have had for years, since our 5th graders, I guess now 6th graders, were in kindergarten. We've talked about, read books and talked about the issues of racial inequality and social justice, and yet we don't have everything we need, and we need help, new ways to talk about it, to introduce it to them, resources. My company put on a talk a couple of weeks ago, and it was excellent, with some of the leaders in our firm or managing directors who are Black, and they talked about their experiences. And when it started, I called my boys down, had them watch it, and could say, that guy right there is a friend of mine, is one of the best people at my firm, bar none. Now listen to him talk about his experience as a 6'4" Black man. And that was an experience that I'm so glad and lucky to have been able to offer them. I think more kids would benefit from that kind of thing. To see, hey, wait, that guy's just like my dad, except, obviously even better at his job than I am. So this guy is a rock star I admire. And for them to be able to see him, a real person who's like my dad, but different only in that he has Black skin.
Any other questions or comments? Or I would invite Heather if she had a proposal that you wanted to make.
Yeah, I'd like to propose that we establish a joint task force on diversity and inclusion that can have the parameters discussed as we go forward. I don't think that we need to develop all of that now, but that we establish our commitment to doing this.
Gretchen?
I would agree with her. I concur.
Chris, would we need motions from each board?
We need motions from each board, and then we need board. Yeah, each board would have to make ideally the same motion, and we would need some kind of structure around it to make it actionable, unless it was limited to creating something for which we then delegate to certain people what it looks like, and those people come back with a more formal proposal. That's theoretically one way to do it if we're kind of in an amorphous place right now. I don't know, Heather, how you want to frame it.
Well, I think that we could, at the very least, so we could say the motion could be to establish a task force on diversity and inclusion composed of community members, educators, administrators, board members to examine curriculum, hiring practices. What's the word for, what do they call busing now? Like I know that Easton has kids from Bridgeport in their schools, and it has been brought up many times in Reading that Bridgeport is too far, but what about Danbury? I mean, we've discussed it before. I think maybe this is something that I'm hearing from the community that they would like further discussion on.
In the statutes, it's open choice out of Bridgeport. Right. I have already spoken with the state coordinator for that, and with Chip Dumais at Cooperative Educational Services about seeing if we can't build a Danbury to Norwalk Route 7 similar program. But I am going to say again that if you're going to form a task force and you're going to add it to Stephanie's list of things to do without resources, that's not enough. You want to do this? I want you to do this. We all want to do it. Get some money behind it.
How much money would it take to get this up and running?
Up and running versus.
Right now we're approaching the end of this budget. So for the summer,
this budget comes out on the 30th of June. Yeah, I was just saying that you should form this committee, but you should allocate resources toward it.
So can we build that into the motion then? If we say to establish a task force on diversity and inclusion made up of educators, administrators, board members, community members, for the purpose of examining curriculum, hiring, student enrollment, demographics, to be funded in the next year's budget?
I think that ship has sailed.
Well, I mean, sort of, because we don't know what school's going to look like in the fall, do we?
Right.
And I'm assuming this is going to be like a $700,000 ticket item.
Well, another way to think about it, to frame it as a task force with a report back requirement, and the report back involves a proposal for funding for fiscal 22. So this aligns with
you heard.
Why couldn't we fund it with the unspent funds from this year?
Because those funds are, you can only spend them up to the 30th of June.
But
you heard Dr. Pearson-Ugal lay out for you a timeline, so I think it would be fine to put together a task force to support that work and come up with details at another point. I'm just saying that if you don't have money in your budgets, then you're going to have to go looking for grants or other ways to fund it, or you're going to have to discontinue something you're paying for in order to take that money and put it towards that. So.
I think this may be a good July topic.
Mm-hmm.
I think in theory, the task force or committee could come back at any point in time and say, we've identified a program we think is important. It costs a combined $18,000. That's $9,000 between each district. What we have to do to move money around for that, and then it becomes a conversation on reallocating what's already in the budget at that point. And to your point, Heather, to the extent that distance learning reduces transportation costs or something, and there's so-called found money at some point in the fall, then the resources theoretically exist in the fiscal 21.
And another charge of this committee could be to look for funding to support this work.
Mm-hmm.
So I would still like to go ahead and make this motion tonight, and I would include in that an additional to focus on, what was it, curriculum, hiring, student demographics, and securing funding to support diversity and inclusion education in our schools, not to the exclusion of it being a budgeted item.
Help me.
You can't type that fast.
What's it going to say?
I have something.
You do? Okay, because I put something up.
Okay, I have established a diversity and inclusion committee to be comprised of educators, administrators, board members, and members of the community to discuss and recommend action to the boards related to the topics of hiring, curriculum, student demographics, and funding. What's the edit we need there?
I like task force rather than committee.
Committee, okay.
Because committee.
I think technically it would be a committee though.
Right.
John, can you share your screen so that we can see, so
Yes.
that the secretaries in the
Yes.
group
Yes,
can snap a
getting
picture?
there now.
Thank you. We're doing our best over here.
No, I'm with you.
Heather, is that it? Is that what you want to say?
Establish a diversity and I would say a task force on diversity and inclusion to be comprised of educators, administrators, board members, members of the community to discuss and recommend action to the boards related to the topics of hiring, curriculum, student demographics, and funding. Funding for diversity initiatives. Or you could even say anti-racism initiatives. Diversity and anti-racism initiatives, which is something that we heard a lot of tonight.
That's it? That's what you like?
Establish a task force on diversity and inclusion, being members and members of the community, discuss and recommend action to the boards related to this. Yeah, should there be something about like follow-up to ensure that this is actually happening?
That was going to be my next comment, which is what sort of report back do you want, or what sort of deliverable do you want from the task force?
Oversight of these initiatives to ensure their proper execution. I don't know.
That's overstepping the authority of a committee, I think.
The follow through.
Well, the committee is going to have a charge.
Right.
And the charge should be what directs their activities, and therefore that would be what they would be reporting back to each of our respective boards.
Could we say to this end, a committee charge will be drafted and presented at our July meeting?
I'm not sure I would include it in the motion, and I would wonder whether or not it makes sense to identify the members of this task force and have them draft the charge to bring back for approval.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that they can have a first conversation about what it is that they think is reasonable, so that we're not kind of shooting in the dark a little bit.
That's the whole point, is that it's not, I'm not going to be the one to say, oh, here's how we need to teach our kindergartners anti-racism. That's, I mean.
And to be clear, this would be to establish a joint Easton/Reading task force?
Yeah. So then are you going to take out the to this end?
Yep. Good.
Okay.
So is that a motion from Heather for Reading?
I'll second.
Second, Mr. Riley. Is there a Reading? Is there an Easton motion the same? Gretchen, is there a second?
I'll second.
Katie? Any further discussion on the motion, either board? If there's no further discussion, we'll call the vote in Reading. Heather?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Chris Hocker?
Yes.
Also vote yes, it carries 6-0. John Easton?
Jenny?
Looks like.
Okay. Gretchen?
Yes.
I believe Randy is not on. Jeff?
Yes.
Katie?
Yes.
I also vote yes. The motion carries.
Before we move off the diversity and inclusion curriculum topic, one last call for any questions or comments with respect to either Tom or Stephanie's remarks or the topic generally. Okay. Hearing none, we move on to section 5, reports and district / building administrative reports. I understand that Easton heard building reports at their regular meeting last week. If Natalie or Phyllis had any comments with respect to building level at Reading, we welcome that for a moment.
This is Natalie. Good evening, everyone. I submitted my report a couple of weeks ago, so hopefully the Board of Ed had an opportunity to take a look at some of the engaging activities that I presented on there, the different grade levels. A lot of the stuff has happened already. We had our virtual field day on Monday, which I got some neat little information from families sharing that they had a real blast at their houses engaging, as did we as staff at home. Today we have, as Colleen mentioned, our stepping up ceremony for our 4th grade students, which although virtual, I think was well received. And I thank Joe Amodio for really helping to spearhead that and lead the way with that. So thank you. Any questions, I would be glad to answer them. But again, it was what I had sent a couple weeks ago was information regarding distance learning and just showcasing some of the student work during that time.
Thank you, Natalie.
How does kindergarten enrollment look?
We are all, if everyone completes, again, I think going back to the question earlier of what is August or September going to look like and us not knowing, I do think we have some families who may be sort of in waiting mode right now. If all of the families who have sought registration materials, we are close to 100 at this point in time.
Any other questions for Natalie from Reading? Phyllis, did you want to say anything?
Hi, everyone. I apologize for no video, but I literally poked myself in the eye this morning, and it's not a pretty sight. So I'm just going to ask your indulgence. I really do just want to mention that we had a wonderful send-off for our grade 8. We had over 20 volunteers in our building on Friday, distanced and masked, but very appropriately coming together to support our students. They made the deliveries home. We have lots of photos on our website. In addition, as I know our colleagues also did over in Easton, we created a video, a Flipgrid presentation, and I would encourage everyone to look at these things on our website, including virtual concerts that we have just gotten from Mr. Ebert. So a lot, and talent shows, some really good stuff. Again, it's all online, and unfortunately we couldn't do it live, but I'm so pleased that we came together in a positive way for our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. Any quick questions or comments for Phyllis? District administrative reports. I don't know if we have anything from Jen tonight. Conti?
There really isn't anything new in special ed. We are going to be starting our extended school year program, which we run for the month of July for special ed students who qualify. But other than that, everything is pretty much status quo.
Thank you. Scott?
Sure. For the Reading financials, I'll start with the health insurance reserve. We have the May claims in, and while they have risen compared to the last few months, there's still below the average that we've had so far this year. So we've seen that trend coming down here in these last few months of the year. That said, I'm anticipating the outlook for this end of June report, of course, dependent upon what happens in June, which is tricky to project a single month, but depending on what it is, I would guess that we're going to end with a reserve of about 100K. The board had previously directed me to use unexpended funds to bring that balance, that June 30th balance, up to 500. So that would put me, if everything holds, with a contribution of about 400K from unexpended. The reason I wanted to start with that first is the budget object summary that you've received reflects that provision. So I've gone ahead and encumbered 400K of contribution to the medical fund. I will confirm that after the first of the month, and as I'm able to then do a look back on June actuals, and I can fine tune that and make that exact. So that would say that would bring our total unexpended down then to just over 300K from a budget object summary standpoint. And then as regards the transfers report, you'll see that I'm transferring to cover building repairs as usual. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions?
Can you repeat that? So you said that so after you take the unspent funds and move them to the health insurance, there will still be 300 left?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Does that mean 300 goes back to the town, Scott? I think that's what we said, right?
Yes, that's right.
Whatever it ends up being.
Right, yes.
Once we reach 500 on the health insurance reserve.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
No other questions for Scott. I don't think there are any other district or building administrator reports. If Sue or Kim want to say anything. Okay. Hearing none, Board of Ed committee reports. I think I would ask Chris Hocker to give a brief update from the steering committee. I understand we have some dates with respect to community forums that might be of note.
We do. Unfortunately, I don't have them in front of me. Do you, Chris?
The July 7th through 9th.
Right. In terms of an update generally, as indicated before, the steering committee is trying to go forward with a very aggressive schedule that would put a community survey out literally by tomorrow, and to time the collection and receipt of the survey to coincide with community forum to be held. And again, the dates you just mentioned, Chris. Concurrently with that, advertisements for applicants will again be going out literally tomorrow. When I say going out, there are publications that are read by school administrators and the Association of Public School Superintendents in Connecticut, and also other places. So what our consultant envisions is that the community feedback and the applications will come together, and at the same time we will be holding a public opportunity, probably via Zoom, for people to express their views directly instead of just through a structured survey. And on the basis of what the survey tells us, it will help us screen through the applications. This is all hopeful now, but it's the way that our consultant says it can and should work. He does expect a wide variety of applications. So this is going to come together roughly mid-July, followed by rounds of interviews by the steering committee.
Thank you, Chris. So from the community's perspective, they should be out for a survey relatively soon to participate in writing feedback on what we're looking for in a superintendent. And secondly, on various dates, on various times on July 7th, 8th, and 9th, there are opportunities for different school communities and the community at large to meet with the consultant by Zoom to provide some feedback also.
Yep. Yep.
Any other Board of Education committee reports for tonight? There are none. We move to public comments. And again, in a participant's window, if you raise your hand, we can recognize you for public comment. Stephanie Benton.
Hi, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Stephanie.
Oh, hi. My name is Stephanie, and I live on Worth Drive. And I would like to say that as a member of the minority community here in Reading, I am really happy to hear some of the efforts that have been taken underway tonight. What I would like to remind you all the most is diversity and inclusion go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And what I'm finding is a lot of people want to talk about diversity, and the issue of inclusion is kind of just there. I was one of the parents who expressed some hesitation with the JRMS project, and that's simply because you have a small minority population at JRMS, and to have those kids sitting in a forum where there's no one there helping to represent them makes them stand out. And that's one of the things that we're concerned about as parents, is for our kids to not be placed in a situation where they're helping to educate your kids, but being felt left out. So if there are going to be conversations with children, and I believe Colleen made the comment, yes, we want to do something for the community, but not at the expense of our minority community kids being felt a particular way. My son was sent home with material from RES that was very insensitive in nature, and from there, he withdrew from distance learning education, and it was very hurtful. He didn't want to participate in any of the on-screen actions. He didn't even want to send word to his teacher, and that was because of the material that came home. And so again, while diversity is important, inclusion is even more important, because I now have a child who I have to explain why this material came home from school. And Colleen, I understand that you had to do some research behind it, but it was very alarming to some of us in the African American community, because these conversations have now taken a different turn, not just what we're seeing on the news, but how they feel about how their school is portraying them. And so that's just something to remember while we're thinking about what we're going to do to help educate the town. Think about the kids of color who are being asked, who have to stand out and represent for a small portion of the population that's here.
Thank you, Stephanie. Graziano, Cheryl, looks like.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing? How's everybody doing? Thank you for having a robust meeting as usual. And we're sorry that, well, I'm sorry that Region 9 couldn't get enough quorum to join all of you. But that's my personal comment, not those on behalf of the board. So again, I want to thank you all on your work, and the administration as well. This has been an interesting time, so I want to thank you all that. But I do have comments with respect to diversity and inclusion. And thank you, Heather, for being an advocate who is not the only minority across all three boards. And so to Stephanie's point, there is a burden on, it is what it is. I'm not complaining. I'm sure other people aren't, but there is a burden of being a person of color in a situation where you're really the only one or one of the only few. I have to be very careful about what I say and how I say it, particularly when I'm a public servant. And so want to be articulate, want to be thoughtful, want to gather facts. And as everyone knows, in working with me, I think there should be measurable measures with a task force that would be established at the Reading and Easton level, and hopefully Region 9, and that this doesn't just become something else on a list that never changes. So I would really advocate as a personal citizen of Reading that we actually develop metrics and measurements. And if we can advocate for things like Latin or special education or gifted and talented or lacrosse coaches, or pick your topic, and we can effectively get community support, then we could hopefully certainly do it for diversity and inclusion. And so, again, as a board member, volunteer board member, happy to support everybody in their effort. As a Reading person of color in the community who is also part of a multiracial family, I think I would want to stress that diversity in education is everyday education. It's not just singling out any time of the year, whatever, February for Black History Month, or, oh, by the way, let's talk about Chinese Railroad in terms of, it should be every day. And that's where the inclusion comes in. That's where minorities won't feel like, oh, well, it's your time of the year. Let's talk about you. It should be all the time, every day. And I think there is commitment from the community, and I've been pleasantly surprised and hopeful that we can actually do something as communities of Reading and Easton. So looking forward to the longer journey. I know this is not an overnight thing, but I will stress that there should be measurables, and I'm hoping that not just the communities or the people of color in our communities are the ones advocating, but also all of our other colleagues and residents in Reading and Easton. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Layla Arisi.
So my name is Layla Arisi from Easton, North Park Avenue. I'd like to talk on the task force for diversity and inclusion, and was wondering if it's a matter of funding, could students or people my age also fund it? And could I start something like a GoFundMe to raise money for it? Because I think I could get a lot of people and students to back this up. And I would like to start it through social media immediately. And I would like to have like resources sent by you guys so I can start it.
I think generally funding is tricky when it comes to public education and what can be raised privately or directly through tax dollars. But I do think that when it comes to the task force identifying projects or potential opportunities, that in the same way that there would be grant writing, that opportunities through fundraising would certainly not be problematic necessarily. But I would leave that to the task force to figure out the best way to move forward.
Okay, well, whatever you decide, my email is given to most of you. So I would like you guys to reach out. I could definitely help. Thank you.
Layla.
Thank you. Katrinka.
All right, I was trying to figure out how to unmute here. Hi, everybody. Katrinka DeLeon, Pickett's Ridge Road. And I'm new to Reading, and I am a Black family, actually a biracial family. My husband's Asian, I'm Black, and we have students in RES, and I mirror a lot of what the parents are saying here relative to our concern about our children being exposed as a result of what's intended to be awareness, but the conversation surrounding diversity now making our children stand out. But specifically for me, I look at diversity as something related to character education. So I feel like it's the school's responsibility to assist students in becoming socially competent in the classroom and in the world. Combining character education with the diversity curriculum allows students to have a deeper connection to their peers. This needs to be on an ongoing basis. So students need to understand the character portion of understanding diversity in terms of, some of the things we teach them similarly, like perseverance and, being neighborly and, kind and things of those natures. They need to understand the social awareness portion of diversity, and that needs to be paired in. We speak a lot about knowing the history relative to different cultures, but there's also a humane aspect to diversity that I feel hasn't been touched upon and needs to be, incorporated. I know that one of the students earlier had spoken about also providing some emotional support by way of a guidance counselor or social worker, of a person of ethnicity. And I think that's important too, because there's a social emotional aspect that comes along with this, and having a resource where students can go to that understands diversity and is able to relate to their social emotional needs is important. So I guess just to sum it up, I feel that it's important that students understand the social responsibility of how their the way they respond to diversity applies to the world, having the support for students in response to the information they're receiving. And then, lastly, really just trying to, in that task force, represent a broad range of people and experts that will facilitate a meaningful discussion that will result in action, that will not lose focus on what the end game is, which is to, provide our students with, diversity. I'm at a loss for words because it's such an emotional topic for me, but, I know my daughter, being the only Black student who just graduated in the 4th grade, came to me in the beginning of the year and she said, Ma, I just don't feel like I belong. And I'd never heard her say that because we generally in our household are surrounded by people of all socioeconomic backgrounds. So I never heard her express that she felt different. And it became clear to me that students in that school weren't as familiar with being around other students that didn't look like them. And not that they necessarily they treated her different, but there would be questions that they would inquire, with her that made her feel different, if that makes sense. And so I think we all agree that there needs to be some awareness and diversity included, but I think that the social, emotional, and character, components can't be missed. It needs to be a collective, if you will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Katrinka. Any other public comment? I don't see any other hands raised in the participants window.
No.
All right. Seeing none. Board member comment. Start in Reading. Anybody from Reading? Easton?
Anyone in Easton? Board member comment? No from Jeff. No Gretchen, and no Katie. Okay.
Seeing none, we've reached the end of the Easton agenda.
Thank you, everyone.
If Easton wants to adjourn their meeting,
I have a motion to adjourn. Katie, do I have a second? There's Jeff. Jeff with a second. All in favor? All right, we are adjourned.
You guys don't have to stay home, but you can stay here.
Adios.